committee to support this extension of this deadline extension.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the member knows, there have been extensions provided already with this project. This project now is 4 years in the making. What he also knows is the North Sydney Forum is under a great need to be replaced. The committee and the organizing board that oversees that have stated it cannot continue operations anymore. They've now closed operations. We have to move forward. They had a deadline to meet. We have to see if it's feasible. If it is, we'll proceed. If it's not, we'll proceed with an alternative.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During community services estimates, the minister indicated that it would cost $100 million to meet the contract demands of the regional residential services workers. That's $4 million for each of the 250 striking workers, Mr. Speaker. $4 million for each of the 250 workers. It must be that new math, Tory math, Mr. Speaker, the same math they used to say that Ham's government would invest $140.3 million in health care when $141 million was the Romano money. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister of Community Services, when will he stop playing games with numbers and step in and resolve the RRSS strike?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for pointing out that the consequences of straying from what has been put in place for the sector would be substantial. Indeed, he's absolutely right. The ripple effects from this on the other 377 service providers, and in fact, the ripple effects that would go beyond the department into other departments such as health would have an impact of over $100 million. He's quite right.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Tory government can find money for Sobeys or Xerox, multi-million-dollar corporations, but the workers who do the job that many of us would not be willing to do day to day can't get a fair wage for the job they do. The workers have to obtain and keep a list of qualifications up to date. They can face violence and unpleasant working situations when residents have behavioral problems. I asked the Minister of Community Services, why do you choose to continue devaluing the work of these councillors by playing games with numbers?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for allowing me to point out that the most important attribute of the care providers is, in fact, that very essence of their character, that they have to be caring, compassionate people. They are special people. And yes, the member opposite is quite right. They do have to take some community college courses, and this is part of what was done to determine what would be an appropriate wage within the sector. And that is what has been done, and that is what has been honoured by this government.
Now, member for Dartmouth North on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The minister knows what would be an appropriate wage. They've already told him. Mr. Speaker, for many years, these staff members were paid minimum wage, and they had to fight to get the point to where they are now. But the Minister of Community Services doesn't think these workers should have a fair wage for the job they do. It also appears he thinks the residents of small options homes don't deserve the same care as residents of institutional settings. I asked the Minister of Community Services, how much longer are you going to hide behind these false figures instead of resolving the labor dispute?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for allowing me the opportunity to point out that one of the important things with the $28 million that was invested in this sector by this government that was to bring up a geographic wage equity across the sector to stop the competition between the 378 service providers for these caring individuals and to bring them to a decent wage that reflects the training and the responsibility that they assume in their roles caring for these residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. In the year 2000, the Department of Education agreed to a funding formula with the regional libraries of the province. Since that time, Mr. Speaker, the regional libraries have had to cope with funding levels that are much lower than what was agreed upon in 2000. For example, the Western Counties Regional Library, Mr. Speaker, has not received the agreed-upon amount as suggested by the Funding Review Committee of 2000. So my question to the minister is, since this government has failed to live up to its agreement, how does the minister expect the libraries in Nova Scotia to provide the essential services that Nova Scotians have come to expect from them?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question, Mr. Speaker. The funding formula to which the honourable member refers, if it were to be implemented, would have resulted in significant declines in payments to some of our library boards, while others would have been increased. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, we have, in consultation with the library boards, continued to use the existing funding formula.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in the year 2001, the government published the second edition of Standards for Nova Scotia Regional Public Libraries. And in that report, Mr. Speaker, there are many standards proposed to be implemented by libraries across the province. Yet this government continued to ignore the agreed-upon funding formula. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't have to remind anybody that people rely on our libraries as their main access to information. So my question to the minister is, how does the government propose that libraries implement these standards without removing resources from some other very important services?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. While we are continuing to review the funding formula and its impact and alternatives, we have in fact this year increased funding to our libraries across this province in the amount of $250,000. While we recognize that there are challenges to the libraries, we will continue to support them, and more importantly, we will continue to work on a funding formula that is adequate and meets the requirements of our libraries.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay and your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, regional libraries across the province are a community's primary location for access. Mr. Speaker, access to information for the purpose of lifelong learning. So my final question to the minister is, how can his government expect the people of Nova Scotia to take their Learning for Life initiative seriously when you only provide the basic resources to our provincial libraries, Mr. Minister?
The Honourable Minister of Education, you have about 15 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for raising the Learning for Life program, because that is the basis of our approach to ensuring that our students in this province are receiving the basics in education. We'll continue to fund that.
Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Before we go to opposition members' business, the Honourable Member for Tourism Culture on introduction. Tourism and Culture on introduction.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring to the member's attention the Speaker's Gallery. Two people that we have here visiting the gallery today, two friends, especially from those on this side of the House, but I'm sure of all sides of the House as well. And Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that we welcome both John and Barbara Shaw and ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Certainly welcome our special guest to the gallery today. Enjoy the proceedings. The Honourable Minister of Education on the point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Earlier in an answer to a question, I apparently used the date of other than the date I had intended. The date that I should have said was 1996, in which the Liberals were in power, and they announced crop of schools at that time, 42, 32 of them which, Mr. Speaker, went to liberally held ridings in that time.
Order, please. Certainly not a point of order, but clarification of the facts for the House. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on a point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, there was a discussion.
Order, please.
There was
the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table an explanation for the minister responsible for the skyrocketing insurance rates that will explain to him that the Manitoba government has just introduced claimant advisors to help people receive better benefits under their policies, and not a consumer advocate with respect to rates, because that would be unnecessary, Mr. Speaker.
It's obviously not a point of order, but certainly information for the House. The Honourable House Leader of the Official Opposition on on opposition members' business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And that was very good bit of information that my leader just provided to help the government House leader so that he will now be better informed when he answers questions. Mr. Speaker, I've passed out the schedule to yourself and to the two other House leaders with the resolution order and numbers. And so, Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 17?
Number 17, the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, this resolution speaks to responsibility, Mr. Speaker. It speaks to the fact of what happened to Dominion Complex, the McDonald Complex in Dominion, Mr. Speaker. And the be it resolved, says this House condemn the provincial Tories and the federal Liberals for the crisis in education now facing the town of Dominion. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to round off some of the corners on that statement because it's important that we realize what's going on here. We're going to step back a bit, Mr. Speaker, and show what happens when a town the size of Dominion loses its education center, Speaker, because schools often define the communities, and I guess with that said, it revolves the other way, that communities are defined by their education. So, Mr. Speaker, what we have here is a government that's saying no to a community. It's cutting off a large section of its lifeblood and saying, no, we don't think that this community deserves a fully functioning school. Although up to and including October 31st, there was a fully functioning school there that everyone agreed should exist. Right. To that point, everyone agreed should exist. Yeah. But what happens is, through no fault of their own, through an unnatural tragedy, they lose their school. So I'm going to get back to subsidence and its responsibilities in a moment, Mr. Speaker. But what I want to get into is what happens when the community loses a facility like that. You know, it's not just a matter of, well, there's excess facilities at Breton Education Centre in New Waterford, or that there's excess facilities at Gleis Bay High, or that there's a junior high complex somewhere else where these people can go, Mr. Speaker. That's not what we are here to discuss, Mr. Speaker. We're here to discuss today what the loss of a facility like that means to the economic and social aspects of a community. What happens here, Mr. Speaker, is without a school, young families will not be attracted to those communities, Mr. Speaker. What they will do is when young people come and want to build new homes and raise families, what happens is that they'll raise their families somewhere else, Mr. Speaker, and it will add to the out-migration of that community. So we have problem number one. Another problem, Mr. Speaker, if you listen to various governments, whether it's provincial or federal, they're forever telling us that we've turned the corner economically in Cape Breton, that the better days are here, that we've gone through the lean years, the years of the federal government shutting down our coal mines, that the provincial government closing steel mills, Mr. Speaker. We've turned the corner around economically, and that we should be all forging ahead now, and that communities can look forward to a bright future and keeping our young people at home, that young people will no longer be leaving with their parents and going to Ontario and Alberta. No, Mr. Speaker, quite the other opposite, Mr. Speaker, that happy days are here again, so to speak. But no, Mr. Speaker, that kind of words ring hollow when you talk to government. Because government looks at a plan and says, oh no, you don't deserve a school. That here's where you're at. Your population base is not going to increase. People aren't going to come to your town. Therefore, we're not going to look at giving you a new school or rebuilding the existing school, because we're not we're not talking about areas right now, Mr. Speaker, that see exponential growth as we see in parts of Metro. We see areas, because if you just look at the latest electoral boundaries review, we see an area that had been in decline population-wise because of those, I would say, the implication of the very ideas put forward by the two levels of government, both the federal Liberals and the provincial Tories, have seen a negative impact in those communities. But let's buy into their theory, Mr. Speaker, as I hope to do, is that the economy is turning around. So it would do well for governments to invest in that school, to build that school and say, look, as we've known it today, as we knew it in the past, and we should know it in the future, Dominion is a good place to raise a family. It's a good place to get an education and move forward with the community, Mr. Speaker. But no, you know, in questioning the Premier today, what did the Premier say in response to the question when we say, as your role as Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, what have you pursued, or how have you pursued the federal government regarding subsidence? And it was, for all intents and purposes, well, we've talked about it, but nah, you know, we haven't pursued it. Then that begs the next question, Mr. Speaker. Why not? Why not pursue the federal government on this matter? I mean, it was a subject pursued in Pictou County, where the Premier's from, and it resolved an issue around a couple of homeowners, Mr. Speaker, and to their credit, that they were looked after. And we're not saying you know, take anything away from anybody, but what I think myself and the good residents of Dominion are saying to this Premier is, what's fair over here is fair over there, Mr. Speaker. That's all we're looking for, is an era of fairness. But this government, when we ask them to go and do some bidding on behalf of these residents at the federal level, because there's negotiations going on with the Cape Breton Development Corporation about bringing home the coal leases, why couldn't that be put down on the table? We will not accept those leases back until you bring forward a plan that would include assurances against subsidence. And the prime example would obviously be the McDonald High School. Now, a former Tory government built that complex knowingly over that coal seam and that mined-out area, Mr. Speaker. Yet, when it comes to responsibility, they walk away from it. Now, this is a same government that from its inception has taken the position of dollars follow students. Now, what they've done, again, is basically not being able to back up what they're saying. Because I'll go back to what I said the previous, Mr. Speaker, if they were indeed being open with the people, and if indeed that the economy has made that big turn in the road, as they're telling us, then they would say, look, we have to be in front of this population spurt, this growth that's going to happen because the economy is growing. Well, we have to be in front of it. What do you need? You need infrastructure. Your infrastructure obviously is highways and road and water and those type of things. You need hospitals and medical attention, and obviously you need schools. Yet this government is willing to walk away from a huge investment in that community because it sees it getting off the hooks from a financial obligation, as opposed to seeing it as an opportunity. It's moved away and it's told the people of that area, no, you people in Dominion do not deserve a school. You don't deserve what most of us in this province take for granted is a community-driven school where people can go and gather for community events, whether it's something as simple as the holiday type play or choral festival, Mr. Speaker, or a larger arena for people in the community to gather, as they did last summer, Mr. Speaker. McDonald District High had celebrated its 50th anniversary last summer, Speaker, and you know, and it was in no small part due to the tenacity of local residents who pitched together and made that probably one of the largest social successes in that community in some time. And it seems, you know, that it's almost heartbreaking when you after that amount of work going into to that facility, and to have a government walk away from its responsibility. But I want to also put on the record today, because this certainly has a large part to do with this resolution, is the role the federal government has played, Mr. Speaker. Because while I'm more than disappointed that the province hasn't pursued the government as vigorously as it should, it's the complete lack of response from the federal sector to come in and say, well, you know what? There are responsibility. The local MP said, well, he said, we took over the resources, but we didn't take over the liabilities. Well, you know, I've never heard that said that way, or I've never heard you buy into a contract and all we're doing is taking the upsides. But, you know, all the downside, that's somebody else's problem. And then the management of the Cape Breton Development Corporation will say silly things like, well, we never really operated that mine. But that makes absolutely no sense, because, Mr. Speaker, as you know, the provincial cousins of the Liberals here have said, have agreed the fact that flooding was the cause of that subsidence. Oh, yeah. And the flooding was caused by the federal government, through its Crown Corporation, the Cape Breton Development Corporation, turning off of the pumps that would have kept those mines clear, Mr. Speaker. And you know, it's always good to see yourself in the chair, Mr. Speaker, because when we speak of subterranean mine, you know, Mr. Speaker, you know, having lived in Spring Hill and in another life been an emergency officer, police officer in that community, and known the devastation that a mining disaster can wreak on your town. And so I'm happy to see you, especially in the chair today, Speaker, because I think you may have a better understanding and a bit more compassion towards what's facing the people of that town than maybe some others. And I'm not saying that these people are particularly, the other members are particularly uncaring, but I think you bring an understanding of the gravity of the situation more so than others because you've lived it. So, Mr. Speaker, my time is almost up, but there's really two things can happen here, and one I'm afraid is not going to happen, is that this government will just take the full brunt of the responsibility and go forward and rebuild at least a middle school and a high school, or a P to 9 school in that community, Mr. Speaker. If they're not going to do that, take on the full cost of it, then they should be willing to take on the federal government for their fair share of this disaster. As I said in a question earlier today, Mr. Speaker, if indeed some other misdeed had happened, if someone had burnt that school, or if it had been wrecked by some other havoc, we'd be talking about when is the rebuilding going to take place, if not today, when. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that we, in that community, all we want to do is be treated fairly, as the people in Westville were, as the people in other communities are, that this is the disaster. It's not of the making of those citizens, Mr. Speaker. It's of the making of an uncaring federal and provincial governments that have to, instead of punishing these people, come to the fore. Because I'm going to tell you right now, Mr. Speaker, if that was a private sector company in there, the government would be shouting from the top of the hill that you got to do it. But it won't use the same litmus test on itself. So, Mr. Speaker, I advise this government to build that school and do it forthwith. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for bringing this resolution forward. And I also, while I don't accept his characterization of us as being uncaring, I do, however, wish to acknowledge the work that he has done with respect to promoting the issue and the people off that area and expressing their concerns. He's been very effective with respect to that. And I've heard from him on more than one occasion. And Mr. Speaker, I've also met with representatives from the area on more than one occasion, and I've had an opportunity to listen to their concerns. The events in Dominion have been very difficult for the community, and there's absolutely no question about that, as has been indicated by the honourable member. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, as I've assured many Nova Scotians who have written to me, that the educational needs of the Dominion students will continue to be well met. The MacDonald Elementary School and nearby schools with vacancies are meeting these needs. Our students are in a safe and healthy learning environment, and that's what's important here, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, the MacDonald High School was a great school and only 15 years old. The loss of the school has been devastating to the community. Subsidence has affected other buildings in Dominion, and the community continues to be troubled with the potential loss of other buildings in the future. Mr. Speaker, throughout this distressing episode, the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board has made notable efforts to assist the community and ensure that its children continued to have a safe place to learn. I want to now say a few words about the board's efforts. When the subsidence event occurred last October, and after cracks were found in walls and foundation, the school board responded and removed students and staff from the building. 250 students, Mr. Speaker, in grades 7 to 12 were relocated to the nearby Breton Education Centre. The 44 grade 6 students were removed into the elementary school building next door to the damaged facility. The school board continued to show leadership throughout this very difficult situation. They've managed the transportation of the students, the evacuation, the removal of equipment from the high school, making important and tough decisions each and every time. Mr. Speaker, my department has supported the school board throughout this series of events. The department paid for the cost of removing equipment from MacDonald School to Breton Education Centre. We're paying for additional busing. We arranged for buses from other boards to be sent to the Cape Breton board at no cost to the board or the department. We paid the cost for added teaching staff, and we've paid for a lunch and bus supervisor. When an engineer's report concluded subsidence as the reasons for the damage, a $3.5 million price tag was placed on repairing the school, that is, the building itself. After our review of that report and my staff's meeting with the board and the consultant in January, it was determined that the $3.5 million was only for repairing the building and did not take into consideration what it would take if structural damage was found or stabilizing the site so that damage wouldn't occur. That estimate was $5 to $6 million with no guarantee that it wouldn't reoccur. That brought the amount to $8 to $9 million. After considering this, we advised the school board and community representatives that the school could not be rebuilt in Dominion. We also could not replace the damaged school on its site, as there was no guarantee that subsidence would not occur. In response, the Cape Breton Regional School Board, the Cape Breton Victoria, Regional School Board decided the school was not salvageable and would demolish it. I believe that will occur this summer. Mr. Speaker, our government is not building a new school in Dominion because ample vacancy exists in nearby schools. Elementary students in Dominion will continue to go to their school in the community, and grades 7 to 12 students will choose between schools in New Waterford and Glace Bay. The Department of Education will provide a portable addition to the elementary school that can be removed in case of future subsidence event. And that, Mr. Speaker, is very important because we have no guarantee that there would not be such an event. And we will also continue to provide support for busing. The school board has a contingency plan in case of a subsidence event at the MacDonald Elementary School. As for the future, if the Cape Breton Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board submits a priority list with a request for a new school in Dominion, then the School Capital Construction Committee will consider it. As a note that the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board is investigating the potential for subsidence at other schools in the area. following reports on old mine workings provided by the Department of Natural Resources. The school board has done the prudent thing and hired consulting engineers to review the potential for subsidence in these schools. Subsidence is a big issue that affects communities in several parts of Nova Scotia. We have to consider the event in Dominion as part of a larger picture. As I mentioned earlier, a safe and healthy learning environment for students and school staff is most important, and that's what we're doing here and across the province. And Mr. Speaker, I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to the honourable member for the beautiful Musquodoboit Valley, Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you very much, and I thank the Honourable the Minister of Education for giving me a few moments to speak on this extremely important matter, Mr. Speaker, and I too would acknowledge the hard work of the member for Cape Breton Centre for bringing this issue to the forefront at the Nova Scotia legislature, and I'd also like to recognize and acknowledge the member for Glace Bay for bringing this area of concern to the Nova Scotia legislature. I think, Mr. Speaker, that I'd like to read into the record as well the second whereas of the honourable member for Cape Breton Centre's resolution. And the second whereas is, whereas the federal government has shirked all responsibility for this damage, even though it ran the subterranean coal mines whose collapse caused the subsidence. And Mr. Speaker, speaking of the federal government, and more especially the two federal members of Parliament, the one for Sydney Victoria and the one for Brador, Mr. Speaker, I would like to note that the Honourable the Minister of Economic Development and the Honourable the Minister of Natural Resources have held meetings and will continue holding meetings with the Member of Parliament for Brador regarding subsidence, and I suppose more particularly, Mr. Speaker, subsidence as to how it relates to residential residents as well. A number of people in Cape Breton, and I suppose more especially in the Dominion area, are extremely concerned about subsidence, and the fact that it was the federal government that shut the coal mines down, Mr. Speaker, it would only be appropriate then that the federal member of parliaments take those concerns to Ottawa. And I know likewise the members here in the Nova Scotia legislature, and again I do acknowledge the work of the member for Cape Breton Centre and the member for Glace Bay for again bringing these issues to the Nova Scotia legislature. This government, and particularly the Minister of Education, has been working extremely hard on this file, and it is very, very difficult, Mr. Speaker. I know in the 52 ridings across this great province that members of all political stripe are advocating and supporting new schools for their riding, and it's a very difficult and onerous task for the Minister of Education to deal with. But, you know, there is a unique situation in Dominion, and this government recognizes that and acknowledges it, and we're very concerned. All members of this legislature, I would submit, especially the Minister of Education, is concerned about a safe and healthy environment for students and school staff, and we feel that that is most important. So, Mr. Speaker, we're not only doing that in Dominion, we're doing that right across this province. Now, the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre, I do take issue with the Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre standing in his place, getting on his pins and suggesting, well, perhaps more than suggesting, that the government is saying no to the community of Dominion. That's what the Honourable Member said, when in fact you didn't suggest it, you said it, but I am saying as well that that's not the case. The Minister of Education, the Minister of Natural Resources, and the Minister of Economic Development have met, Mr. Speaker, with a lot of individuals, and the Minister of Economic Development, representing Cape Breton North, is pushing the agenda of subsidence appropriately with the Minister for Brador, Roger Cuzner. Now, I think that the Honourable Member opposite would be aware of that, but didn't stand in his place and acknowledge that. Now, I shouldn't prejudge, and I haven't heard the dissertation of the Honourable Member. I expect it'll come from the Honourable Member for Glace Bay, but the fact of the matter is that subsidence in this province is a big issue, and it affects communities across this province, several communities affect, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, another whereas, and I'd like to again, for the record, the honourable member brought this resolution forward, and it is resolution number 17, and I did expand a little bit on his whereas the federal government has shirked all responsibility, and I can only take the honourable member at his word for saying that. I think he knows of what he speaks. The fact of the matter is perhaps the federal government should look at the federal gun registry, the $1 billion boondoggle. There's $1 billion. Oh, so the honourable member for Timberley Prospect thinks that there's some justification in spending $1 billion on an ineffective gun registration and can't put 5 cents into the community of Dominion to find out what's wrong with the subsidence, Mr. Speaker. The member for Timberley Prospect should, in fact, well, I better not get sidetracked by the rabbit tracks, Mr. Speaker. You know that there was a $1 billion boondoggle in HRDC. There was a $1 billion boondoggle in the gun registry. I mean, the Prime Minister had no difficulty buying, what was it, a couple of Challenger jets. He couldn't replace the Sea Kings. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, yes, $100 billion. $100 billion. What was it? I don't know. I guess it was $100 billion. $100 billion. Mr. Speaker. $100 million, Mr. Speaker. But the fact of the matter is we have to set priorities, and this is about priorities. This government has made education a priority, will continue to make education a priority, is concerned, will work with the school board down there, has worked with the school board down there, but our primary concern, the primary concern of this government is the safe and healthy learning environment of the students and the teaching staff in all schools across this province. Now, Mr. Speaker, that may be difficult. That may be difficult for the member for Dartmouth East to acknowledge and support, but that's a principle that we strongly believe in. Not only in the front benches, every member in the PC caucus believes in a safe and healthy learning environment for students and the teaching staff. The member for St. Margaret's certainly does believe in that, Mr. Speaker. So I would just like to thank you for giving me this opportunity, Mr. Speaker. It is a difficult and sensitive issue, and this government is working hard with the community members and all stakeholders related to that problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Glace Bay. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to apologize, first of all, to the people from Dominion who have made a very long trip here to have to listen to the likes of that.
Order,
Mr.
please.
Speaker?
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay knows full well that he's not to speak to strangers in the House, put his comments directly to this chair, and not to speak to people in the gallery. The honourable member for Glace Bay has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for that slip. And you might not want to take the advice of some members, Mr. Speaker, but I want to say to the people from Dominion who have been watching this perhaps on legislative TV, or perhaps some people have been watching it here in the gallery, that this is not a good example. That was not a good example of what we should be doing here in this legislative assembly. Unfortunately, I made the prediction that this could turn political. Unfortunately, that's exactly where debate on this resolution has gone. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to follow those tracks. I think the people of Dominion deserve more. I think the people of the surrounding areas of Dominion deserve more. That this issue should be dealt with strictly on its merit, Mr. Speaker. This is a crisis situation that faces the people of Dominion and surrounding area, that they have lost their school. But not only a school, they have lost the community center as well. A center that was used, it had a gymnasium, a center that was used for community events, a center that was part of the community itself, and a school that was a major part of that community itself. A school that for 50-some years had graduating classes go through it, and students, not only students from Dominion, may I add, Mr. Speaker, but students from Glace Bay and surrounding area also attended MacDonald High School. Now, Mr. Speaker, I would dearly love to stand here and say, as the member for Cape Breton Centre has made a point in his resolution, that the federal government would step forward and say, let's build a new school in Dominion. But let's be realistic, Mr. Speaker. Let's be realistic. And let's not throw the people involved here and the students involved here any curves. Education is a provincial responsibility. The Minister of Education knows that, And the Premier of this province knows that. Even the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley knows that education is a provincial responsibility, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government has been given a recommendation by the Cape Breton Victoria Regional School Board to build a primary to grade 9 school in Dominion to replace McDonald High Complex. It's very simple, Mr. Speaker. This government is over there thumping its chest and boasting about how great it is doing on the subject of education and on the subject of building schools. Okay? It's easy. Just simplify it totally and build a school. There's no need. And I want to thank, I may add, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the people of Dominion. I want to thank the people of Dominion for not following the rabbit tracks that have been set down and playing off one community against another, as this government would dearly love them to do. It's not a question of one community versus another. It's a question of a community, a small community in this province that had a school, and there are many, many small communities on that side, Mr. Speaker, that have similar schools, that if they should have the unfortunate tragedy of them falling into the ground, burning, or whatever may happen to them, that those members who represent those smaller areas would be here pounding on a desk saying, build us a new school. It's part of our community, Mr. Speaker. That's all the residents of Dominion and area are asking for, Mr. Speaker, is exactly that, because of the crisis they face. Mr. Speaker, we know, and the members on the government side know, that education is not just a cost. Education is an investment in our children, an investment in our future, and an investment in our community, Mr. Speaker. This community, the community of Dominion and surrounding area, is not asking for anything major. What they are asking is for their fair share to replace what was there. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, this community in negotiations with the Cape Breton Victoria Regional District School Board has gone down from what was there. Originally, it was a primary to grade 12. But now they've said, we will accept primary to 9 because it's important to our community to have that facility, to have it. We need it. We want it. It's ours, rightfully so. It was and should be in the future. Now, what they've received from this minister so far, Mr. Speaker, is that, yes, they met with him and he said, nah, I'll think about it. It didn't take him long to think about it. He stood here in this House today and he told the residents, no, you're not getting a school, final. But what he's tried to do is play off other areas against the former town of Dominion. And it's not working. We're not falling for it in Glace Bay. They're not falling for it in Gardner Mines or Reserve or anywhere else, because they know, as well as the residents of Dominion know, that they deserve that facility for that area. Mr. Speaker, you know, you have to treat those residents and their children and their families and their educational needs, but you also have to treat their community needs as well, Mr. Speaker. Education, as I said, extremely important. We all know that. And education comes in the form of a building, of students in a school, being educated, teachers and parents. We all play a role in education. But, Mr. Speaker, if you take away what was the very heart of a community, in this case, their high school, their primary to high school, you take away the heart of that community, then indeed, Mr. Speaker, you have threatened the very community itself. And that's what's at stake here. Handed a report, and I hope that the minister will read this report in full, Mr. Speaker, which is entitled Dominion McDonald School Complex, a Second Look, which is prepared by the Save Our School Committee. I don't know if it has been tabled here, Mr. Speaker, but I'll table it before the House so that all members of the House can get an opportunity to read that report. I hope the minister gives it a very careful perusal. I hope the Premier takes a very careful look at what has been said in this report, Mr. Speaker, because as I mentioned and as I've said many, many times before, what we are dealing here is the very heart of a community. And this government has from the very start said we're not going to listen to anyone in that community. If they were listening, they'd still be negotiating about a school, but this minister has put the hammer down and said no. This minister stood here today, Mr. Speaker, and then shared the time with the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, who decided to play politics with this issue. Now, Mr. Speaker, where's the other good members from Cape Breton? Where are they, Mr. Speaker?
Order, please. Member Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the member for Glace Bay seems as if he's prepared to stand in his place and promise a new school to the people from Dominion. Now, will he tell the people from Dominion if that's backed up by his leader?
That's a question, I guess, for the honourable member of Glace Bay, if he wishes to address it.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley stood in his place and played politics with this issue. Let me tell the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. The honourable member of Glace Bay has the floor.
Let me tell the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley, and I'll answer his question, and I'll ask him to ask his premier the same question, and ask him to build a school for the people of Dominion. But when the time comes and Danny Graham speaks on this issue, you'll be listening. You'll be listening, Mr. Speaker. That member, Mr. Speaker, will be listening. And that member and that government will know exactly where we stand on the issue of Dominion, Mr. Speaker. And it will be as clear as a bell when the time comes. There'll be no doubt whatsoever where we stand, Mr. Speaker, because our leader has sat down with the residents of Dominion and talked to them and listened to their concerns, and he's gone to the community, Mr. Speaker, on 2 occasions. And he's listening, Mr. Speaker. He's listening because he's a leader who cares about the people in that community, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the residents have requested, and on a compassionate basis, Mr. Speaker, on a compassionate and reasonable basis, backed up in that report with statistics that show that their community is not total decline. Their community is prepared to grow. Their community is prepared to get larger. Their community is looking forward towards economic development. And when it does happen, Mr. Speaker, when it does happen, they're saying, we need a school. We need a school in our area to help build on that. It's how economic development is achieved, Mr. Speaker. Tell me a company, tell me an operation, tell me a business that's going to stay located in Dominion if there's no school where the people who run those businesses and companies can send their children, Mr. Speaker. Tell me that that won't affect the former town of Dominion, that people won't start moving away because there's no longer a school. And, Mr. Speaker, you can say it until you're blue in the face, as the Minister of Education has, that they can go to other schools, but, Mr. Speaker, that is not the same. The minister knows that, and the people of Dominion and area know that as well. What they had was theirs. They're asking for it back, Mr. Speaker, on a reasonable basis. Now, Mr. Speaker, I know I don't have much time left, but I wanted to say that I'm not shocked. I'm not particularly shocked to see how this government has treated this whole issue. I'm not shocked to see how this government has ignored the requests of the people of Dominion. I'm not shocked to see how this minister really, I don't think, could care less about what's going on in that area, Mr. Speaker. I'm not shocked by any of that, because we've seen time and time and time again how this government treats people, Mr. Speaker. We've seen it on many issues, and now we're seeing it on the issue of education, an issue that is so important to the people of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, that it should be, and all of a sudden it is, the newfound #1 issue of their premier. All of a sudden, it's the new...
Order, please. Order, please. Now, member Glace Bay has the floor. About 2 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, all of a sudden the issue of education, among other issues, debt management is another one, is the newfound important issues and will be contained in the Blue Book Part 2 of the Premier and the Leader of the Government. Well, Mr. Speaker, it should be a priority every day of the year, not just all of a sudden before it's election time. And unfortunately, because of the timing and because this government has delayed so much on this issue, This is not a new issue. The government has had plenty of time to take a look at this issue. But because of their delaying tactics, what's going to happen now is that smack dab in the middle of an election campaign, the issue of McDonald School, high school complex, it won't be a high school anymore. The school board has not made that recommendation, but the issue of McDonald School complex will now become an election issue. An election issue, Mr. Speaker. An election issue that, because this government will not make a decision, it wouldn't even be an issue if this government did the right thing right now and said, we're going to build a new school for the people of Dominion, as recommended by the Cape Breton Victoria District School Board. It doesn't get any easier and it doesn't get any simpler than that. You follow the recommendation of a duly elected school board that said, here's our recommendation, please do it. And that government go ahead, take it to Cabinet, Mr. Minister, take it before your fellow Cabinet colleagues from Cape Breton, and let's have them fight for the people of Dominion so that they can get a new school. Mr. Speaker, I can't make it any simpler than that. Any simpler than that. And if you had attended, Mr. Minister, if you had attended the public meetings that took place in Dominion, you'd understand just how committed those people are, and I can guarantee you their fight is not over. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Timberlea Prospect.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that I think I was about 6 at the time when I first visited the legendary coal mining community of Dominion. My father was fortunate enough after the war to play in the fabulous Cape Breton Hockey League of the time. And as a player for the Sydney Millionaires, he constantly talked about what a wonderful reception you always get in Cape Breton. So I can remember as a young fellow going to first to Sydney and then to New Waterford, but finally into the community of Dominion. And it was at that time I can recall, because of the fact that my own grandfather had grown up in the community of Westville, I saw firsthand what the legendary coal mining communities are all about. And, you know, it was just 5 years ago where I had the opportunity to take a junior hockey team back into Cape Breton, and we ended up playing in the rink. The rink just across the way from the school, as the St. Margaret's Mariners won the Atlantic Championship, and the Cape Breton Alpines, it was a good way to go. It was a good run. But you saw it again, that rink was full, and you saw how important the rink, along with the school, and along with the church, and churches in the small communities of Nova Scotia, and how important they are. And as you well know, Mr. Speaker, from where you worked and lived for so many years, those three vital components are so important in communities such as Spring Hill and such as Dominion. And I want the residents of Dominion to know how fortunate they are to have an MLA such as the member from Cape Breton Centre. And I make no bones about the fact that it was just similarly, I think, about 5 short years ago, although some days I'm quite reminded that it was about 5 short decades ago, that I had the opportunity to meet that member. And the first occasion I began to realize that the people in New Waterford, the people in Dominion, the people in Reserve will be well served by this member. And of course, I can't use his name in Hansard, but the MLA from Cape Breton Centre. And I know he's sitting there and he's not going to turn around and once heckle me. But I know how many times he said to me, you please tell to reassure the people that live in my community how important that school is. Now, McDonald School has just had its 50th anniversary. A valuable tradition in that school, in that community, because of the role of the school and not just because of what goes on in the classrooms. And the member from Cape Breton Centre has brought to our caucus, and he's brought to this House, and he's brought to debates in this House, and he's brought to question period the Premier and the Minister of Education the importance of dealing with this issue. Now, as I am aware of the fact of subsidence, because, of course, again, my grandparents grew up in the town of Westville. Now, Westville recently suffered, a number of years ago, a problem with subsidence. It is a federal issue. So I think it's of real consequence that when you look at the whereases that are in this clause, and when you read them clearly, the federal government does have a responsibility to be involved in this process. Let's look at it this way. And heaven forbid that this happens. But what if the rink is next? What if the arena in that community is next and there's further damage because of subsidence? What if we're looking at private homes as we were in Westville? Government took action. Now there's pointing fingers and there's the grandstanding of one political party as opposed to another, provincial cousins or federal brothers or whatever we call them in this House. But here is the crucial issue. The crucial issue is this community deserves a school. And the school deserves to be in that community. Because of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that there is a tradition of involvement with the young people in that community so that parents feel part of the ownership. Parents feel part of the solutions in that school. Now, Mr. Speaker, as you well know, in a previous life, I had the wonderful opportunity to be a school principal. And the schools that are the most effective, the schools that communicate most regularly with the parents, the schools where parents have an ownership in the process, those are the schools that are the effective and successful ones. And Dominion had a very successful school. A successful school based upon involvement, based upon commitment, based upon the young people. You know, when you see young people show up at a political rally with their school uniforms on, Mr. Speaker, when you see basketball players with their school uniform on at a rally to save their school, those young people are proud of their roots. They're proud of their school. They're proud of their community. And those young people want to have the opportunity to continue to attend a school in their community. An effective school is a community school. That's not rocket science. An effective school is a community school. Now, Mr. Speaker, I've worked in schools where they bus them in from all over, if I can use that expression. And the further removed that children are, the further removed from the parents and the school, the less connection there is with the school, the less involvement there is with the school. No matter what the grade, the key thing is that young people and the parents have to feel that they are part of a school. Big, Mr. Speaker, you've heard me use this, and I always make the correction to my own grammar. Big ain't better when it comes to schools. Big is not better when it comes to schools. There is an optimum size for schools. The school that's the most effective, the school that is the most efficient, is where the young people can walk to school in a safe manner. And I understand that there has to be a certain number of buses in some of our bigger high schools, but that children can walk to school and be part of the school in that community.
Order, please. The Honourable Member Kings North on a point of order.
Question if the member would entertain one.
The Honourable Member Timberley Prospect would like to entertain a question.
Mr. Speaker, this is an important topic. This is a topic from the member from Cape Breton Centre, and no disrespect to that member, I'm not really interested in questions. And at another time, perhaps I could engage him on this question. I think it's of crucial understanding that whether it's the Minister of Education or the Premier or members opposite, you don't have to be a teacher. If you are a parent, you know exactly from where I come. We are talking about the fact that in a community such as Dominion, a community such as Dominion has to have ownership in this school. Now, I want to go to a key factor, and I know the members of the third party can get upset with this, but does the Member of Parliament not have a role in this? Does the Member of Parliament, because of his federal relationship to the particular government that's in power in Ottawa, does he not have a role? Can he just step back and say, no, that's for your MLA? That Member of Parliament has a responsibility. It makes no difference what his political stripe is. He has to be fully involved in the process. He has to be fully supportive of the parents. He has to be fully supportive of the community. There's no use pointing fingers back one way or the other. And the last thing that can happen is that when the writ is finally dropped and there are doors being knocked on in communities all across this province, that schools are not part of the election process. And I want the community of Dominion to know that I have suffered through one of those debates. I've suffered through one of those elections where 2 or 3 days before the election was, suddenly on Liberal signs, it came out, "We build schools." And they were plastered all over these Liberal signs. Well, the people of Timberley Prospect did not accept that bribe. They did not accept that falsehood that was given to them, because I want you to know that the campaign team that put those "We Build School" signs up, that did not persuade the people of Timberley Prospect.
Please, the member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's unparliamentary to describe anything in this House, especially on behalf of another party, as a bribe.
Order, please. Order, please. I thank you for the offer of help from the former speaker, but I think I can handle things. Obviously, I missed that word, but again, the honourable member Glace Bay, what was the word?
Bribe, Mr. Speaker. Bribe.
Order, please. That would be unparliamentary. If the honourable member for Timberley Prospect did use that, I'd ask to retract it, please.
I would use the word enticement.
Thank you.
An enticement where they put on those Liberal signs in the middle of an election. "We build schools. We build schools." They didn't add that it was George Armoyan building the schools, and thank God the people of Timberley Prospect decided to return this particular member. I want you to know, and I want it to be clear, that in the campaign that will take place in Cape Breton Centre, the key issue will always be whether there is a community school that has community support, that has a community MLA that's willing to step up and be involved in the process. The community MLA who is saying, "I am going to do everything possible to bring it to the floor of this legislature, to bring it to the Premier's attention, to bring it to the Minister of Education's attention, to bring it to the federal Member of Parliament's attention, that this community should be treated fairly." And Mr. Speaker, that's the key word. Because these parents from Dominion, these municipal people, these school board members, they're looking at other communities. They're looking at other communities around this province. And actually, do schools play a role in the politics of Nova Scotia?
Sure do.
Do paving of roads play a role in politics in Nova Scotia?
Sure do.
Do the building of recreation facilities play a role in the politics of Nova Scotia? Well, unfortunately, the answer is yes to all three. Yes. And that, after all, is a shame when it comes to patronage paving politics. It's a shame when it comes to announcing recreation.
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. The honourable member Colchester Muscataba Valley on a point of order.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker. Yes, on a point of order, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect should know that Elmsdale, Lance, Enfield, and Milford are in an NDP riding, and some of the first schools that this government built, if not the first, was in Elmsdale, financed by the conventional, traditional method of financing, where the parents and the taxpayers of this province own those schools. So that I think that member should stand up and apologize to this government for insinuating that schools are only being built in Tory ridings when the first school built was in an NDP riding.
Order, please.
Shame on him.
Order, please.
Shame on him.
Not a point of order, but the honourable member for Timberley Prospect, you have about 2 moments.
2 moments. I want you to know the thing that concerns me most about this process. I hear from the MLA from Glace Bay who speaks in this House on this topic. I hear, of course, from my friend from Cape Breton Centre. I do not hear from the members of that caucus who are members of the government on this topic. And I find that, unfortunately, if there's going to be a school problem in a particular region of this province, we will speak up. We will have our say.
Order, please. Order, please. Honourable Minister of Economic Development on a point of order.
A point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've been on this side of the House, and I've heard the diatribe from the NDP and the Liberal caucus about the members from Cape Breton not speaking on this. Well, Mr. Speaker, this entire caucus cares about this issue. So when the minister wants to address this, and my colleague from the mainland who cares enough to get up and address this issue because of lack of leadership from the government of Canada on the fundamental issue of subsidence in dealing with the problem, then I suggest, Mr. Speaker, I'll be happy to speak in this House as a Cape Bretoner any time about any issue, or the issues especially for the good people of Dominion.
There's not a point of order. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect, you have about 40 seconds left.
Mr. Speaker, I have 40 seconds. Let me tell you, I look forward to going back to Dominion. I look forward to having the opportunity to visit with the parents and the children. I look forward to being in a school in that community, a school that is built because of the right reasons, not because of political reasons. It's built because the community deserves the school, the kids deserve a school, the people of the community have a long, rich tradition of involvement, and they should have that school in McDonald High in Dominion. I thank you for your time.
Time allotted for resolution number 17 has expired. The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you. Would you please call resolution number 906?
The Honourable Leader of the official opposition.
An opportunity to speak to resolution 906 so that those who are following this debate, Mr. Speaker, will know what it is that we're talking about. I would like to begin by just reading the operative clause of the resolution. You would know, Mr. Speaker, that it reads, therefore be it resolved that after 10 years of shameful neglect, this government and the Liberals should commit themselves to the implementation of the Special Education Implementation Review Committee report so that every child in a Nova Scotia classroom gains the attention and the resources that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Special Education Implementation Review Committee was struck in order to look at the implementation of the special education policy of the government that was released in 1996. And I think in order to be able to kind of properly situate this, we should understand that that a report filed on February 6, 1998, after 5 years of liberal government, stated as follows. And I'd like to read this, and then I'll table it, Mr. Speaker. It says, this is the work of the Education Funding Review Work Group report dated February 6, 1998. It says, special education is significantly underfunded in relation to current levels of expenditures and needs that are not being addressed. In 1997-98, school boards budgeted to spend $57.3 million on special education programs and services compared to the current funding level of $40.8 million. The work group was advised that school boards should be spending $73 million in this area, representing an overall funding shortfall of $32.2 million, Mr. Speaker. So when this government came into office, there was already a shortfall in special education funding to the tune of some $32 million. Well, Mr. Speaker, since that time, there has been very little in the way of progress made to support students in special education. And if I may, I'd like to talk a little bit about those students, if I can, just to start with. Many of those who require additional resources and assistance in schools, Mr. Speaker, are children, often from the very day that they enter schools, who suffer from difficulties that are not of their own making. These are children who suffer from hyperactivity disorder. These are children who suffer from attention deficit disorder. These are children with deficits, some of which cause disruptive behavior in the classroom. And that, Mr. Speaker, does not speak to all those children who suffer from other kinds of problems, both depression and anxiety, which may not lead necessarily to behavioral disruptions, but nonetheless create significant challenges for both the teacher in the classroom and, of course, for the student themselves. These children need and deserve the best possible resources in order to be able to complete in a reasonable fashion the education that should be available to all. You know, Mr. Speaker, for a long time, the first problem we had with special education students was the whole question of identification and diagnosis. So a child would go into the school system and they would be having problems, they would be having difficulties, but because of the lack of resources, the first problem would be simply trying to figure out what it was what was the problem for this particular child. Now, as I think everyone knows, because we have better standards for diagnosis, because we have more attention spent on these particular issues, it is now the case that many of these children are diagnosed at a fairly early age. Perhaps not as quick as we would like to be able to do it, but they are diagnosed at a fairly early age. So, Mr. Speaker, early on we identify children who suffer from attention deficit disorder or from hyperactivity or for many of the others. The problem is, Mr. Speaker, is that after we identify these children, we don't put anything in place in order to assist them. And it is only in extreme cases where the disability or where the deficits cannot be ignored that the children get the resources that they require. The special education in this province is dramatically underfunded, and this is a major problem, certainly and I think in most schools in this province. And the problem is that because these children don't get the resources dedicated to their improvement that they need, the first time they really start to get attention from the system is when they become a justice problem. So it is at that point that the government decides they're going to start paying attention to these children who have special needs. And this happened to a child in my own constituency. I dealt with her mother on numerous occasions, and she watched while this child moved from grade level to grade level in the system, not receiving the assistance that she needed in order to be a productive student. And the result was, Mr. Speaker, that eventually she began to have trouble not only in the school but outside of the school until she became a problem that was then going to be handled not by the school system, not by the Department of Education, not by the Department of Health, but by the Department of Justice. Because when you fail to put in place the appropriate resources on the front end, that's where you end up dealing with these children. Now, we know that many difficulties that children have with when they go to school, which are identified when they go to school, can be dealt with and remedied if there is early intervention. The problem, Mr. Speaker, is that although we oftentimes identify the difficulties that the particular students are having, we rarely provide enough resources in order to be able to help those children to achieve the results that they could achieve if given a fair opportunity. Now, Mr. Speaker, the Special Education Implementation Review Committee produced a report that was tabled now, I believe, some years ago. I think it's been at least 2, maybe more, maybe 2.5 years since the Special Education Implementation Review Committee's report was received. Made 34 recommendations. Mr. Speaker, 34 recommendations. And some of those recommendations were to deal with some fairly straightforward matters. They dealt with things like access to buildings, ensuring that there was an appropriate barrier-free access throughout schools. There were many of them that dealt with programming, and I'd like to deal, Mr. Speaker, if I may, with a few of them that I think are particularly important. The ones. And that's not to say they're more important than others, but they're just ones that I have identified that I see as critical in assisting young people who are in our schools today in achieving the utmost of success through their public school career. One of the recommendations on resources and support says the Department of Education should define core services and desired service ratios based on recognized professional standards for professional staff at the school board and school levels. Well, Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't think that this would be a revolutionary approach, that the standards that should be applied to the treatment of children in schools should be the kind of professional standards that we would use in any other setting. Mr. Speaker, that doesn't surprise me that would be a recommendation of the SEIRC. But you know something, Mr. Speaker, that isn't the case in our province, not at all. The reality, Mr. Speaker, in our province has been that there is significantly less resources available than certainly in most other provinces, and I know that the minister made a number of announcements recently with respect to investments in special education. But, Mr. Speaker, to give you an example, the recommendations of the SEIRC called for an investment of an immediate injection into special education in the order of $20 million. What the minister has announced is $17 million over 3 years. Over 3 years, Mr. Speaker. So, essentially, a significant shortfall in the funding that was recommended by the SEIRC. But that's not the only thing. In addition, of that $17 million that was to go toward the implementation of the Special Education Implementation Review Committee's recommendations, two of the things that are going to be funded with the money that the minister announced are something called pilot projects, which are undefined, and something else, Mr. Speaker, which is reading recovery. Well, reading recovery is no doubt a very important thing to be funded, but it wasn't part of the recommendations. So even the announcement of the money that's going to be spent does not address the actual recommendations themselves. There are many other very, very useful recommendations here, Mr. Speaker, but before I wrap up, the one point that I wanted to make, and I think is key to all of this, is that we are committed to the implementation of the recommendations of the Special Education Implementation Review Committee. We have said it over and over again. We said that it will be a priority for our government, that if we are elected, the $20 million that is outlined in this document, we will invest that, because we believe that these children deserve to have the attention of their government to meet their needs. I would like to challenge the government to make the commitment to spend that money on special education as recommended by their own committee, and I would further like to challenge the Liberal caucus to commit to the full implementation of the SEIRC recommendations. And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for time today.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for the opportunity to speak on this topic, because for some time now I've wanted to say something about the hard work and the emphasis that's done on special needs, the emphasis that's given to special needs students in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board. I want to congratulate the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board for this emphasis. It's one that they've had for many, many years, and it's well known throughout the province, really, that the emphasis on special needs students is one that is very special in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board. Hugh Siegel, in his book No Surrender, Reflections on a Happy Warrior in the Tory Crusade, has these words to say, and I think these words are exemplified by the people whose names I'm going to mention. He writes, "Government is not for helping the wealthy, the powerful, and those with vested interest, lest anyone check they're doing okay. Government is for people who don't have a large union to protect them on their job sites. It's for low-income people. It's for coming to the rescue when the odds are so stacked against the little guy that only the government can come to the rescue. These people whose names I'm going to mention are people who've given yeoman service above and beyond the call of their jobs in order to care for the vulnerable, to the special needs students, many of whom, Mr. Speaker, we know are vulnerable people in our society. In the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board, Cindy Giffen-Johnson's the coordinator. She oversees the direction of delivery of services to special needs students. And that's a delivery that takes place across 42 schools, Mr. Speaker, including 9 high schools and over 17,200 students. The consultant for student services is Greg Mackin, who does excellent service as well, and I know him personally. He's a neighbor of mine, and he's devoted much of his life to this. Some of the programs that we have that I want to mention are the teacher assistant programs that there are in other school boards as well. In our particular school board, there's 180 full-time teaching equivalent TAs serving 324 Category A students. Those are students who require assistance with toileting, mobility, feeding, medical procedures arising from severe learning disorders and medical disorders such as PDD, cerebral palsy, or autism. Another program that is directed to special needs students that really is a model that could be used across the province, Mr. Speaker, is the Assistive Technology Program. The Annapolis Valley Regional School Board has, and I'm not boasting, I really mean this when I say this, I think it's truthful, and any objective study would bear this up, that it has the finest assistive technology program in the province. It's called START, Special Needs Technology Assessment Resource Support Team. And this team partners with the Technical Resource Centre operated by Mr. James Roy, another neighbour of mine in Canning, and it's located within the King's Regional Rehabilitation Centre. And this partnership between community services and the Department of Education should really serve as a model for all of us on how to do technology assistance for special needs students. A third program, Mr. Speaker, that we have in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board that forms part of the orbit of services for special needs that's made our school board known throughout the province for this emphasis is the Career Access Program for at-risk students in grade 10 to 12. And this program is because of the grade level it's found in our high school settings, and it's had a 10-year history of great success. In fact, the employment rate, and I think this statistic is really quite amazing, the employment rate is 70% for these at-risk students who enter the program. These are students, by and large, most of them would not graduate, would not go on to employment, and the rate is 70% for this particular program. A fourth program that we have in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board targeted towards special needs students is transition planning. And this is on the opposite end of the scale, Mr. Speaker, from the other program I talked about. It addresses the needs of children coming to our schools from early intervention programs, and it monitors needs from grade to grade, from school to school, and from school to work and to adulthood. We have 3 transition teams in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board representing Annapolis, Kings, and West Hants. And these 3 teams ensure optimal services are put in operation for needy children. This could range from alternative transportation to seeking appropriate residential and vocational placements upon leaving school. A fifth program that we have that's an important part of this orbit of services to special needs students is the Behavior Intervention and Prevention Program to ensure safe schools and to try and promote a healthy and a positive learning environment within our schools. Greg Mackin, who I mentioned, is the Student Consultant Services Coordinator, and the staff under him, they work very hard to intervene early in the lives of young children and their families to help effect positive change. They're also involved with the Department of Education's Code of Conduct initiatives and are one of the 3 boards across the province that are participating in a pilot in this particular area. They're in the midst of initiating day services for youth program for students ages 12 to 15. And this is really quite exciting because one of the problems, Mr. Speaker, I've seen in my time in government is we silo. And because we silo, we don't serve the needs of the citizens, the students in this case, and parents of our society as well as we should. And so in order to overcome this, we have a collaboration between Family and Children's Services of Kings County, Mental Health, and Justice, and it come together in this committee known as the Kayak Committee. And the Kayak Committee is chaired by Mr. Jim Gunn, who's the superintendent of the school board for the Annapolis Valley Regional's School Society. So the Kayak Committee is one that has some real potential to bring together and to avoid the siloing and to bring together different resources to help meet the students' needs. These are just some of the programs, Mr. Speaker, and along with Cindy Giffen-Johnson and Greg Mackin, who serve these special needs students, I should mention Kim Hume. She's a consultant with Student Services who's been seconded until June of this year, and to focus specifically on programming with students who suffer from autism and programs for students who require enrichment. And she's well known. Kim is well known in local and also in provincial circles for her expertise in these particular areas. We have speech language pathologists. We have 6 of them with the school board who, as I said, these are people who go above and beyond service to help with special needs students. Pam Shelton, Thea Burton, Krista Lunn, Nancy Childs-McKenzie, Dr. Christine Sloan, and Nancy Nanchuk. And then we also have learning disability specialists. We have 3 of these. Marilyn Reeve, Marie McIsaac, I don't know if it's any relationship to our Minister of Education, and Karen Dyke. And these learning disability specialists provide direct service to students, and each of them carry a caseload of 15 students. We also employ the services provided by APSE. We have the services of 7 personnel through this program who provide services to children who are hearing and or visually impaired. Anne-Marie Ledbetter, Laurie Moore, Phyllis Blanche, Lorraine Fisher, Shelley Q, Peter Fife, and Graham Swain. And all these are backed up by the administrative assistant, Daphne Moore. So we have excellent work, dedicated staff. These are staff who go above. They don't go home when the job's not done and say their time's over. They put in extra service. I know many of them personally. And it's no wonder that our school board has this wonderful history of emphasis upon special needs. And it's a difficult task. They can always use more resources, I'm sure, but I did want to laud them. I've seen them in work for 3.5 years now, and I've wanted to have the opportunity to say something about them. On the larger picture, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite has suggested that funding's been cut to our special needs students, but in reality, the budget that was passed this past Monday invested more money targeted to fund school boards for students with special needs. Special education fundings increased from $40.8 million in 1998-99 to $48.5 million in 2003-2004, and that's an increase of 19%, Mr. Speaker, which is an excellent increase and one that we should be very proud of. And that's the money, just to make it very clear, that's the money that the Department of Education tells school boards they must spend on special education, but school boards such as mine indeed spend more. They choose to spend across the province another $30 million, and that comes out of the $126 million provincial and municipal funding they receive for the year. So in essence, there's really $70 million going to special education through our school boards, and that's a substantial amount of money. And as I said, the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board does an excellent job with this, and are really a model, I think, in many ways for ministering, for dealing with families and children, for serving families and children, students who have special needs. Now, I know that the minister will, in the few minutes left, be able to give us a little wider picture of this, but I really do appreciate the opportunity to go on, Mr. Speaker, because I've seen this emphasis. I've tried to find out why we have this emphasis historically, and many people have pointed to the military personnel who come into Kingston Greenwood from other areas and who've seen services in other areas and who've replicated them and helped to encourage the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board to start such programs. But no one's been able to tell me really the reason or the rationale why the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board has this emphasis and is well known for this emphasis, but it's there. And it's an emphasis that's backed up. I've mentioned the staff that are the frontline people there. I've mentioned Dr. Jim Gunn, who I think, in my opinion, is one of the best superintendents in the province of Nova Scotia. Whenever I'm in the company of the deputy, he's the former student too of our Minister of Justice. And whenever I'm in the company of the Deputy Minister for the Department of Education, he's always talking about the hard work that Dr. Gunn does. And he's backed up by a very good board of volunteers. Two from my area, Shirley Jackson from representing Port Williams and part of Canning, and then next door to her, Jenny White, who's come back. She served in the past and has run again and been re-elected. Jenny White lives in Halls Harbor, and she has responsibility shared responsibility for the Canning High School and for the Kentville schools, Aldershot and KCA, where she has to work with various people. And these are just two of the many board members who again are people that I cannot say enough about. We work well with them. And cooperate with them. Sometimes we have different opinions on things, but we have a wonderful relationship. And I think that working together of various departments of the government and various levels of government, in the Kayak Committee, Justice, as I said, Mental Health, Family and Children's Services, Department of Education, all coming together so there's not this silo. And then on the other hand, the school board reps working with the provincial representation and working with the staff. So I really appreciate this opportunity that the minister gave me, because it is an excellent job that is done in the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board, and I want to laud them for the work that they've done.
Order, please. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll just inform you at this time that I'll be sharing some of my time with the member from Dartmouth East during this debate. And, Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to stand and debate Resolution number 906, a resolution which deals with a very serious topic, but the resolution itself is somewhat puzzling as well, Mr. Speaker, because, as you well know, the resolution by the leader of the official opposition calls eventually for both the government and the Liberals to commit themselves to the implementation of the Special Education Implementation Review Committee report. Now, why I find that puzzling, Mr. Speaker, is it going to be the government that commits itself, or is it going to be the potential government that commits itself to that resolution, and why the NDP has left themselves out of the mix, so to speak, because perhaps they already know that they really don't have any chance whatsoever of forming the next government, is the only conclusion that I can come to, Mr. Speaker. But I say that in jest, and I say that lightly, Mr. Speaker. But on the topic of special education, of special needs, Mr. Speaker, indeed, I don't think, and I know as a matter of fact, that former Liberal governments do not have to take a back seat to anyone in this subject, Mr. Speaker, because I know that former Liberal governments, Mr. Speaker, took special needs and special education out of the dark ages, Mr. Speaker, and that's a fact in this province. I don't think there's anybody that can dispute that it was former Liberal governments that started the ball moving, Mr. Speaker. Started the ball moving, Mr. Speaker. And where we're left, Mr. Speaker, where we're left right now is we're left with schools and school boards currently attempting to provide a very wide range of programming and services for students with special needs, but within financial and other resource limitations, Mr. Speaker, and therein lies the problem. That is the problem itself, Mr. Speaker. Now, we know, and we know that educators have made comments on a positive impact on students having a fellow student with special needs in their class. And we know educators have observed that inclusion promotes awareness and acceptance of some very diverse needs, Mr. Speaker. and at the same time increases a student's knowledge about individual differences and tolerance as well, Mr. Speaker. So those are some very important issues that we deal with on a daily basis on the subject of special education and special needs, Mr. Speaker. You know, it's the goal of inclusive schooling, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that the membership and the learning of students and school programs and activities and so on, the participation is there, but it's the lack of resources, Mr. Speaker, that is jeopardizing the implementation of that goal. That has an impact on not just special needs students, Mr. Speaker, that has an impact on all students in this province. So, Mr. Speaker, and yes, I agree with my colleague from Dartmouth North, more so with special needs students. That's absolutely right. This is not a matter where there's great disagreement, Mr. Speaker, not a matter where there's great disagreement between parties on what should be implemented and what should be there, but there is a great deal of disagreement, for instance, with this resolution and in the way it's worded, Mr. Speaker. That seems to be the problem. It's easy for me to stand here and say that inclusion is a major part of being a liberal, period. I could say that politically and say it I could say this is a major part of any of our Liberal Party's platform. We're proud of it and would be a major part of any future party platform as well, Mr. Speaker. You know, this is what Liberals stand for, Mr. Speaker. It's very easy to say that, but you know, as we've said, that among many other things lately, such as all of a sudden education and debt reduction, all these great ideas now are so important to the Tories that they've made them a major part of their campaign to try and get re-elected because there's an election coming. You know, it doesn't take much for the light to go on. There's an election coming soon, very soon, as our Premier once said, Mr. Speaker. And you, I certainly don't know the date or anything. I wouldn't ask that of you. Well, maybe you do, but I wouldn't ask you anyway. But, Mr. Speaker, it's coming, and that's why all of a sudden that we see those topics coming up. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, this is, and as I said, I want to share the majority of my time with the member from Dartmouth East because he is a member who has a great deal of experience and a great deal of respect on this subject as well, Mr. Speaker, and I want him to get his opportunity to speak on this subject. But I also wanted to make, as everyone knows, that indeed this is the right of all of our children to have open, free access to education. It's a matter, it's not just something that we think of every day, it's in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in this country. And it's also there for equality rights. It's one of the foundations of the whole subject matter. So on that note, Mr. Speaker, as I said and as I stated, we certainly do not take a back seat to anybody on this issue. And the fact of the matter is that we started the ball rolling, and we will continue to have that ball move in the right direction. We'll continue to see that important things, such as the Special Education Implementation Review Committee report, are treated as the priority that they should be treated, Mr. Speaker. And having said that, I would now pass over the remainder of my time to my colleague, the member from Dartmouth East.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague from Glace Bay and who's entered in the debate on this very important issue. And I agree that this, of all the issues that you discuss, that we discuss in this House, that probably the one that warrants the not of political intervention is this issue of education in general, but particularly that of special needs. Because as other members have mentioned, the special needs is a part of that larger, that bell-shaped curve of students that have on either end of the bell-shaped curve have special needs. That may well be the gift, as called the gifted children, or those that have particular skills in learning and achievement, and also those that have dyslexia, learning disabilities of various types and natures. and mental challenges that have special needs. The resolution itself was noteworthy. The member from Glace Bay mentioned as well that the government and the Liberals seem to be linked there. I expect the NDP have been reading the polls as well, and the more likelihood to form a government will be between those two parties. So I suspect that's why they were concerned about our commitment. Well, our commitment is clear. We have been a party that has addressed these issues. In 93 to 99, there was a 111% increase in teachers' assistants in the school system in Nova Scotia. The number in that period of time went from 718 full-time employees to 1,515. That was a significant increase, and I think that speaks well of the commitment. So our party is on side. Our leader, Danny Graham, and our party is extremely committed to the special needs of all children, because all children have special needs. Some are just different and have more special needs than others. Because with the inclusion in education that has followed and developed over the while and enhanced the education and development of all children, this has dramatically increased or impacted on the behavior within the schoolroom, with the classroom, and the impact of teaching and the learning of students. So many times the resources that are required with children with special needs has been that outside of the classroom, and whether those services are going to be provided within the Department of Education or Department of Health or Community Services or whatever has always been and continues to be an ongoing battle. And I think as a practicing family physician, when I developed a lot of interest in particularly learning disabilities, we thought it was a male disorder at that time. We know that not to be true. So I look back over my 30 years after having graduated and worked as a family physician from 1964 on, how much knowledge we have now. So the recommendations, the 34 recommendations that was mentioned earlier on the review committee, now need to be addressed and followed. So, but the concerns that I brought to the House of Assembly in 1984, having 20-some years of experience there with trying to coordinate and work with families, with children with particular special needs and challenges, was one of sometimes frustration. And that frustration still remains to this day. Currently, the special education grant provided to the school boards for this current year by the Department of Education was $46 million. And the school boards across the province spent $75 million, essentially. In other words, there are $29 million that was more than what the department funds for this particular need. I don't want to dwell totally on funding, but I think this is important because basically this money is coming out of property taxes in our various communities. So we have committed as a party to address those funding formulas and the funding that is targeted for special needs. The children are at higher risk, generally speaking, those with special needs, and they are in need of a quick assessment, whether that's provided by the Department of Education or the Department of Health or whatever. But we need coordination by the four departments, the Community Services, Health, Education, and Justice, because those, when needs are not met and dealt with accordingly, those children often come in contact with the Department of Justice. We need within our hospital settings and where the services are provided, whether speech pathologists, we need coordinated scheduling and we need coordination. So that's why we need the coordination of departments, and we need it within the service providers' session. Some members spoke of the rights of the child, and I think that demonstrates very clearly the rights of the child to be, for matters relative to literacy, shelter, nutrition, and most of all, personal safety. And that's the needs of all children, but particularly those with special needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to inform members this morning I had the wonderful opportunity to visit a school in my community. After public accounts, it's always convenient, and I know members, the outside members, don't have the opportunity to do this, but you do have that chance on Wednesday to slip out and do some important constituency work. When I was in Ridgecliffe today, I had the opportunity to run into an exceptional young man by the name of Martin de Leon, D-E-L-E-O-N for Hansard. And Martin de Leon, Mr. Speaker, was a past student of mine, and he is a teacher's assistant at Ridgecliffe Middle School. Martin has the responsibility of dealing with a high-needs child in that school, and the responsibility is one that he, of course, takes very, very seriously. When I was in the school for the few moments this morning, they were planning a musical, and I thought it would be appropriate that in their program that I gave them some assistance through a donation. I had the opportunity to visit this young man that Martin de Leon, the teacher's aide, is responsible for. And let me tell you, I know how proud Martin is of the job that he does. You see, the major concern that has happened in curriculum in schools across this province in the last 15 years or so, Mr. Speaker, is inclusion. And it's of real consequence that members present understand what inclusion and how valuable it is to young people in our schools. Because I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that as a teacher, you have the wonderful opportunity to deal with children of all kinds of abilities, all kinds of interests, and all kinds of capabilities. In each and every classroom that I've been responsible for in my years as a school administrator, there have always been children with special needs. And these children with special needs bring special interest to the other children that are in the class. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, it is truly a learning process. It's a learning process because of the teachers, many of them of my vintage, who were in a position of being responsible for children with high needs. Did we have the background? Did we have the expertise to be able to deal with young people with these special needs? So different from so many other students in our classes. Some of the same social skills, some of the same social expectations, but for other reasons, academically, a different set of skills completely. And I think it's really important that we look carefully at this resolution, because the concern that I come out, and I know that members in the third party will be perhaps rather perplexed with this, but let me tell you that when we look at the Education Funding Review Work Group, that is a committee in February of 1998 that reported, quote, and I'm quoting from the resolution if I may, Mr. Speaker, special education is significantly underfunded. That was in 1998, Mr. Speaker. Now, you know, we just can't continue, as you well know, Mr. Speaker, whether it's the medical system in this province, whether it's the justice system in this province, or whether it's the education in the system in this province, we just can't continue to throw money at it and that will solve the problem. But the concern comes down to the fact, particularly when it comes to people in the classroom, people who are directly involved with these young people who are challenged for one reason or another, those are where the dollars must be given priority. I heard from the member from Kings North stand and speak of Mr. Gunn and the good work that he does. And, you know, I went to university with Mr. Gunn, and he is one of the better superintendents in this province. He's accountable. He knows what goes on in his school. But Jim Gunn is a long ways away from the student who has high needs or special needs in a particular classroom. It's fine for the member from Kings North to stand in his place and talk about these issues, but I challenge the member from Kings North to walk a mile in the shoes of a teacher that has some of the problems that we can look at today, and to look at the limited resources that are available to teachers when they take on this particular issue. You look at the size of the class, first of all, and the size of the class can be a contributing factor, whatever that number would be. Let's make it in excess of 30 for the case, Mr. Speaker. But in that class, you could have 3 or 4 children with high needs, with special needs. And maybe you're fortunate enough to have one of those young people who has an aide, who has someone there who can assist that particular young person with some of the work that's available that day to make sure that they're organized and ready to go to the next class. Then when you look at the fact that you also, depending upon the class level, of course, and the course that you're teaching, you have a lot of different lesson plans. Mr. Speaker, those days where the teacher came in, wrote the lesson on the board and said, that's what we're doing today, class, that doesn't happen anymore. It can't happen anymore because of the expectations of parents, the expectations of children, and the various needs that have to be met in classrooms across this province. The concern, however, comes down to the fact that the Special Education Implementation Review Committee confirmed recently that it would cost $20 million to meet minimal improvements that have been recommended. The concern that comes up with that committee, and I know that the minister and I talked about this during estimates, is that we have to move away from the pilot projects and we have to make sure that the true people involved, the parents, the people that have the most at stake with these young people, are truly feeling that they are part of the process. They are part of the process, they are consulted, and they are listened to. Because it's those parents, the love that they have for these children, the love that they have for all their children. But you know, Mr. Speaker, I can tell you of some tremendously moving school graduations that I've attended. And school graduations, of course, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of awards that are handed out. And I'm sure in your duties as the MLA for Cumberland South, you have the opportunity to attend school graduations. But I've had the opportunity to attend Sir John A. Macdonald's graduation, and I've seen the major awards be presented in physics. I've seen the major awards be presented in social studies and history and political science. And then I'm aware of the fact that a young man or a young woman with special needs, of one reason or another, comes up onto the stage to receive his or her diploma. And the reception that that young person receives from his or her fellow graduates is truly emotional. Because many of these other children, young people by the time they're getting out of high school, I should call them more appropriately, Mr. Speaker, many of them have gone to school with some of these young people with special needs who have been included in the regular school system, in the regular classroom, where they should be. They have invested in time and in effort in assisting these other students. And when they see their fellow graduate rock across that stage and get their diploma as a special needs student that's graduated from a school, Mr. Speaker, it is a truly moving moment because those young people in that school, they appreciate what that student with high needs has taught them. And what that student with special needs, high needs, whatever we wish to call it, Mr. Speaker, they've taught the other students in that class patience. They've taught them the fact that you should listen to other people when they have a special need and a special concern. They've taught them also the fact that there is, after all, that opportunity every class and every day just to say something special to a certain student who you're in a class with, a student that might need your assistance, not necessarily in the way of a lot of curriculum assistance, but a smile, saying you're doing good, I'm enjoying having you in my class. Those are the sorts of special moments that students in schools across this province are benefiting from because there are these special needs children in our classrooms. But Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear with this, and as you well know, I have many friends who will still admit that I'm a friend of theirs, who are teacher friends. And they're getting burnt out. They're getting burnt out. They are getting to the stage where they are saying, you know, I don't know if we can just continue this sort of patchwork approach, Mr. Speaker, to meeting the various curriculum needs of students that have been included in my classroom. The inclusion process has resulted in the fact that there are many teachers, the caring teacher who is concerned about the progress, the measurable progress of every student, Mr. Speaker. You know, no longer do we teach the middle and just allow the high needs kids, you know, well, they'll take care of themselves, or the teacher aide will take care of that. The concern comes down that the curriculum was put in place, the changes were made, but the necessary dollars that are important when you make a curriculum change such as was decided over a decade and a half ago, that the dollars have to follow those programs, and in a substantial way, to make sure that the teacher has input, to make sure that the teacher has the assistance. But most importantly, Mr. Speaker, and this is the key thing, and I know the previous Minister of Education addressed it during her tenure in the department, the issue of class size must be addressed. It can no longer just be the magical number that in grade 9 there's going to be 30 students, or in grade 7 there's going to be 25. Let's not play that number. Let's look at the composition of a particular class. And if in a class of, again, let's use the example, 25, there are 2 or 3 special needs students, then you're looking at a different sort of set of demands upon that particular teacher. Absolutely. And you're looking at a different set of demands on the teacher's aide, who has to work carefully and closely with the set of teachers that he or she is working with. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, Martin DeLeon is a special young man. Martin DeLeon works at Ridgecliffe Middle School. He has the respect of the teachers. He has the respect of the students that he works with. And Martin DeLeon is a valuable component in the successful implementation of curriculum in that school. But there should be more Martin DeLeons. And the Martin DeLeon should receive more, and Martin will agree with me on this, should receive more training so that he should be able to handle, independently from the teacher, some of the other expectations that parents are placing upon teachers' aides. It is a demanding position, Mr. Speaker, a demanding position that requires the assistance of additional funds to make sure that this curriculum change can be put in place. Mr. Speaker, I can bring to your attention the success of the many challenged young people that I've had to work with. And I want you to know, Mr. Speaker, it is a wonderful opportunity to see them meet with success, because when they meet with success, our schools, our community, the people who live on their street, they share in that success, Mr. Speaker. They share in that success because they have attained a goal which is measurable, which is attainable, and which makes them feel that they are truly part of the community in which they live and the school they attend. To the many teachers and the teachers' aides and the parents who have worked so hard to make sure that this funding remains in place, I encourage them to keep up the fight. We will make sure that when the time comes that there will be proper funding, there will be proper staffing, there will be a proper class size, and these young people will not be forgotten. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Time allotted for resolution number 906 has expired. The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes our business for the day, and turned over to the Government House Leader to announce tomorrow's hours in business.
House Leader, tomorrow's hours and order of business.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I move the House to now rise to meet again on the morrow at the hour of 12 noon. The House will sit from 12 until 8. Following question period, the order of business will be public bills for second reading, and we will continue with, at least start with the continuance of Bill 36, the Financial Measures Act 2003.
Motion is the House adjourned until 12 noon tomorrow. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned. We've now reached the moment of interruption. The Honourable Member for Kings North.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Speaker. It'll probably surprise no one that I'm not the first in line to speak in favor of tax cuts. In part, that's because of what I saw as the ineffectiveness of tax cuts under the Reagan government in the States in the early part of the 90s. In part, it's also my own lack of clarity and experience about different types of tax cuts. And in part, it's because of what some of the leaders in my community are calling for, although I suspect that many of the individuals who don't speak out on this issue really do want a tax cut. But more study and reflection has led me to conclude that there are room for tax cuts and stabilization policies, that is, in policies in which activated GDP is kept near potential GDP. And specifically, what's changed my mind and what's been important in me as I've reflected on this is the effect of globalization on economic planning. I was reading Bob Ray's book, Three Questions, rereading his book, Three Questions, and this is a point that Bob Ray makes after his own experience as Premier of Ontario, and he makes it quite strongly that we are at the end of capital controls. And what he means by that, what Bob Ray means by that, Mr. Speaker, is that we can no longer be isolationist in our economic policies, that Nova Scotia has to watch very carefully what other provinces are doing and has to keep in some measure in step with other provinces. And when other provinces such as BC, Alberta, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, New Brunswick, and we're now hearing the new PQ government, the government, not PQ government, the Liberal government in Quebec, are also advocating tax cuts, that we really have to take that very seriously because we can't be economic isolationists anymore. This is a real problem, I think, not just in between the provinces, Mr. Speaker, but it's a problem in between the country of Canada and the country of the United States. And this is an issue that I don't have any answers for, but it's one that I struggle with an awful lot, and that's how we can maintain and enhance a just society in Canada when we live in proximity to the largest economic superpower in the world, and a superpower that has a very different perspective on what a just society is all about. The differential gap between the high and low income people is much higher in the States